So, I want you to imagine a massive homeowners association, like one that governs the entire planet.
Okay, I'm picturing it. Sounds stressful already.
Right. And imagine five of the oldest, wealthiest estates in this neighborhood built these massive, just highly volatile neighborhood leveling fire pits in their backyards
Yeah.
decades ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then they turn around and write this binding neighborhood charter explicitly banning anyone else from ever buying a match. And they claim, it's entirely for the safety of the
I
community.
mean, that's an inherently unstable architecture for a neighborhood.
Exactly. And if you point out the glaring hypocrisy, they just tell you, well, our fire pits are grandfathered in and your house just isn't zoned for that kind of heat.
Right. And what happens when a community is built on that kind of structural paradox is that eventually the people living under those rules start demanding to see the building codes.
Which brings us perfectly to the core of today's deep dive.
Hmm.
We are looking at a single, just intensely passionate audio commentary file today.
Yeah, it's titled Iran's Bomb.mp4.
Right. And the individual speaking in this file is essentially standing in the middle of that geopolitical neighborhood, just screaming at the HOA.
Pretty much.
They are relentlessly pursuing this one central question. Why is Iran forbidden from having a nuclear weapon when so many other nations possess them without the same global pushback?
And it's a really raw piece of tape. I mean, the speaker goes on this deep intellectual and emotional journey to try and find a logically consistent rule for global nuclear policy.
Which, spoiler alert, is hard to find.
Yeah, very. And we should probably clarify up front, we are looking at an unfiltered, highly colloquial rant here. The speaker makes some really charged categorical statements about the United States, Israel, North Korea, and Iran.
Yeah, and it is so crucial to state right now, for you listening, that we aren't analyzing this to validate or endorse those specific political viewpoints. We aren't here to take a side.
Definitely not.
Our mission is just to dissect the anatomy of this person's frustration. We want to unpack the underlying logic they use to navigate a global system that feels, to them at least, completely arbitrary.
Because this single voice, it actually represents a massive kind of fracturing shift in global trust.
It really does. So, okay, let's compact this. To understand why the speaker is so fixated on Iran's nuclear status, we have to look at the massive global stakes they attach to it.
Right. They don't view nuclear nonproliferation as this abstract debate for diplomats in Geneva.
No, not at all. They view it as a primary driver of everyday human suffering. The speaker claims that the global effort to stop Iran from getting the bomb is actively causing universal economic collapse.
Which is?
They draw the straight causal line between geopolitical containment and global hunger, poverty, and homelessness.
Which is a really fascinating macroeconomic leap for a layman to make,
Yeah.
but it points to a very real mechanism. Well, when the international community, which is led heavily by Western powers, right, when they attempt to isolate a nation like Iran, they don't just send strongly worded letters.
Right, they use the economy.
Exactly. They utilize the global financial system as a weapon. So
Yeah.
we're talking about secondary sanctions, removing countries from the SWIFT banking network, penalizing third-party nations for trading.
Okay, I see where you're going. So the speaker isn't just pulling this out of thin air. They are feeling the systemic ripple effects of that.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
If a major energy-producing region is economically quarantined, it disrupts supply chains, it alters global energy markets, and all that friction eventually trickles down to inflation and economic strain for just the everyday citizen.
Wow. So the speaker internalizes that localized policy friction as a universal crisis.
They do. They believe the sheer diplomatic and economic force required to keep Iran out of this nuclear club is dragging the entire global economy down. And they state quite emphatically that this exact tension is pushing us toward a third world war.
So, faced with that level of catastrophic risk, the speaker decides they need to solve the puzzle. Like, they need to find out what the actual rule for exclusion is.
Right, because it has to make sense.
Right, exactly. So they start with a demographic hypothesis. They talk to people in their community across different backgrounds. And the prevailing street-level wisdom they gather is that Iran is excluded simply because it is a Muslim country.
It's the sort of clash of civilizations narrative, but distilled down to a man on the street soundbite.
Yeah. But the speaker is highly analytical. They don't just accept this colloquial answer. They stress test it against the actual roster of nuclear-armed states.
And the hypothesis just instantly disintegrates.
Completely falls apart. The speaker looks around and notes that Pakistan has the atom bomb, which entirely breaks the religious rule right out of the gate.
Right.
And then they map out the rest of the players: India, China, the predominantly Christian nations of the West. So religion is clearly not the barrier to entry.
And that realization forces the speaker to abandon the demographic argument entirely. The international community just isn't sorting these weapons by theology.
Though I do want to pause here for a second. While going through the source file, there was a specific detail that really jumped out at me.
Oh, the Germany thing.
Yes. When the speaker is listing the nuclear nations to debunk the religious theory, they explicitly list Germany as having an atom bomb.
Which is factually incorrect, of course.
Right.
Germany is part of NATO's nuclear sharing arrangement, so they host weapons, but they do not possess their own sovereign nuclear arsenal.
Exactly. But pointing that out isn't about, like, giving the speaker a failing grade in high school history. I bring it up because it perfectly illustrates the lens we are looking through. This source isn't a polished policy document. It's an aggregation of grassroots perception. For the average global citizen, the nuance between hosting a NATO weapon and possessing a sovereign weapon is entirely lost.
It just looks like Western power consolidation.
Exactly. It's all the same club to them.
What's fascinating here is that the factual error about Germany doesn't actually invalidate the speaker's internal logic puzzle.
That's true.
Yeah, like, even if you completely remove Germany from their list, the presence of Pakistan, India, and China still successfully proves to the speaker that religion isn't the deciding factor.
So, if the bouncer at the door isn't checking religious affiliation, what is the criteria?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. So the speaker pivots to a psychological argument. Maybe Iran is excluded because they lack the mental stability to manage civilization-ending technology.
And they root this hypothesis in very specific political rhetoric.
Yeah, the Trump quote.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The source cites a media appearance by former American President Donald Trump, where he characterized Iran's leadership as lunatics who are, quote, not mentally stable.
And the speaker observed that this specific framing created this massive ripple effect of debate across global social media.
But this introduces a massive structural problem, which the speaker immediately trips over. They acknowledge there's an administrative body for global nuclear oversight.
Right, they refer to it in the audio as the IAS.
Which is almost certainly a layman's conflation of various acronyms, but they're primarily aiming at the IAEA.
The International Atomic Energy Agency.
Exactly. That is the actual UN watchdog responsible for monitoring nuclear programs.
And the speaker actually has a decent grasp of what that body is supposed to do. Like, they note the club requires inspections, it sets limits on destructive capabilities, and it's supposed to champion the peaceful use of nuclear technology for, energy and medicine.
Yet the speaker spots a glaring systemic contradiction here.
Yeah.
The IAEA is essentially a geopolitical accounting firm. I mean, they count centrifuges, they track enriched uranium. They are not a psychiatric evaluation board.
Exactly. The speaker is highlighting how unilateral political rhetoric, like one leader calling another leader a lunatic, has essentially overridden the objective, multilateral framework of international law in the public's eyes.
It's a huge shift in perception.
Yeah, like how can one nation act as the sole psychological evaluator for the globe, superseding the actual regulatory body?
Well, deterrence theory, which is the entire philosophy that has kept nuclear weapons from being fired since 1945, it relies heavily on the concept of mutually assured destruction. Right, man-D. And man-D only works if you believe the person on the other side is a rational actor.
Oh, okay.
So if you label a nation as lunatic, you are essentially declaring that deterrence will not work on them.
So what does this all mean for our speaker? If the rule is actually about objective mental stability and responsible behavior, they decide to apply that standard globally to see if the international community is actually enforcing it consistently.
And this is where the speaker's worldview really starts to fracture.
Oh, completely.
Because the moment you apply the mental stability rule to the actual map of global nuclear proliferation, the hypocrisy becomes impossible to ignore.
The speaker immediately points to North Korea. They note that the entire Western consensus constantly refers to North Korean leadership as dangerous, unpredictable, and, yes, lunatic. Yet North Korea doesn't just have one bomb, they have a growing arsenal.
Now, I'd argue the speaker is missing a piece of the structural mechanism here, which is the Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the NPT.
Okay, how so?
The world didn't just allow North Korea to get the bomb. North Korea joined the NPT. They acquired the foundational knowledge under those auspices, and then they legally withdrew from the treaty in 2003 before actually testing their weapons.
But, I mean, to the speaker, that bureaucratic distinction doesn't matter at all.
Fair enough.
The end result is exactly the same. The global system failed to stop a nation it universally considers unstable from acquiring the ultimate weapon.
And they compound that frustration with a second example, which is Israel.
Right.
The source points out that Israel refuses to join the international regulatory framework, that IAS or IAEA club. They refuse inspections, and they maintain a completely opaque stance on their arsenal.
Yeah, the speaker categorizes this as an intensely irresponsible attitude of basically, we have it and we don't care.
Right. And again, we have to look at the speaker's specific rhetoric as a symptom of a larger issue. The policy of nuclear ambiguity, which is neither confirming nor denying an arsenal, is a highly calculated strategic posture.
Sure, from a purely strategic standpoint.
But to someone outside the halls of power, it doesn't look like strategy. It looks like brazen defiance that goes completely unpunished by the very same global powers that are sanctioning Iran to the ground.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the speaker is experiencing the violent friction between idealistic international law and cold, hard, real politics.
Exactly.
The stated rule is, only responsible nations should have this power. But the observable reality is that nations get this power through historical accident, covert development, or strategic alliances, and then the rules are just applied retroactively to whoever is left.
It's the total collapse of the moral argument. The speaker is watching the global economy strain to stop Iran under the guise of stability, while looking at a world where perceived instability and opacity are already heavily armed.
It's an unsolved puzzle, and it pushes them to dig even deeper. They decide to abandon the present completely and test the mental stability theory against the historical record.
And this is a critical pivot in the source material. The speaker sets up a hypothetical. They say, okay, let's assume the rhetoric is true. Let's assume a lunatic country will use the bomb to destroy humanity, and a stable, gentlemanly country will act responsibly and merely hold the weapon as a deterrent without ever using it.
Right. If that is the foundational premise of global security, what does the empirical data actually show?
Well, the empirical data totally shatters the premise.
It really does.
The speaker points out that the United States is widely framed as the most stable, intelligent, and high-ranking nation in the geopolitical order. They are the architects of the current global rules.
Yeah.
Yet the United States is the only country in human history to have actually deployed atomic weapons in warfare, dropping them on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Now, for anyone who studies history, the fact that the U.S. used the bomb in World War II isn't exactly a groundbreaking revelation.
No, obviously not.
But here's where it gets really interesting. It's not about the historical fact itself. It's about how the speaker weaponizes that fact against modern deterrence theory.
They explicitly characterize the bombings in Japan as an unnecessary attack on innocent people. And by doing so, they completely invert the entire moral paradigm of non-proliferation.
Yes. To the speaker, the ultimate proof of mental instability isn't angry rhetoric on Twitter or refusing UN inspections.
Right.
The ultimate proof of instability is a willingness to actually detonate the weapon on a civilian population.
Yeah.
If the stable architect of the rules is the only one who has ever committed the act, while the supposed lunatics have only ever stockpiled them, the speaker's entire trust in the international order just dissolves.
The paradox becomes too massive for them to reconcile. I mean, they cannot find a single universally applied standard, not religion, not psychological stability, not adherence to international treaties, not even a peaceful historical record that justifies the current global posture toward Iran.
And because that puzzle is unsolvable to them, the speaker arrives at a conclusion that is genuinely radical.
Very radical.
They argue that to end the current global crisis, the world should simply step aside and let Iran have the atomic bomb.
It's a staggering piece of utilitarian math. Let's trace their logic back to the beginning of the file. The speaker believes the effort to stop Iran is what's causing the secondary sanctions, the supply chain disruptions, the poverty, and the rising temperature toward World War III.
So in their mind, they are placing two catastrophic outcomes on a scale. On one side, you have a nuclear-armed Iran, which, according to their historical and geopolitical analysis, isn't actually any more dangerous than a nuclear North Korea or the historically proven danger of a nuclear United States.
And on the other side of the scale, you have the immediate, tangible suffering of global economic collapse and the friction of a looming world war caused by the enforcement of this arbitrary rule.
And for the speaker, the scale just aggressively tips. The collateral damage of enforcing a hypocritical global order is now vastly worse than the localized threat of proliferation.
Right. They aren't advocating for nuclear weapons because they love them.
No.
They're advocating for the removal of the friction. They just want the geopolitical HOA to stop burning down the neighborhood to enforce a broken rule.
It perfectly illustrates the danger of a fracturing global narrative.
Wow.
When the public, the people actually absorbing the economic shockwaves of international sanctions, when they can no longer trace a logical line between a policy and its justification, you don't just lose their support.
No, you breed a profound systemic distrust.
Which is exactly why diving into this single colloquial audio file is so illuminating. It's so easy to dismiss a man on the street rant as uneducated or factually flawed.
Oh, sure, it happens all the time.
But those raw arguments are the leading indicators of a failing consensus. When international law looks like nothing more than the arbitrary exertion of power by the historically privileged, you end up with millions of people doing this exact same kind of desperate utilitarian math.
And Elise is grappling with a deeply uncomfortable reality. The architecture of nuclear nonproliferation wasn't handed down from on high as a perfect moral absolute.
Far from it.
It was cobbled together after the fact. It was a desperate attempt to close Pandora's box after a few nations had already built their arsenals.
It forces you to look at the entire global security apparatus and ask a terrifying question. If the current system of who holds the power was built on historical accidents, grandfather clauses, and inconsistent enforcement, how can the world ever hope to design a truly legitimate, universally respected system to manage a technology that could literally end human civilization?
Yeah, I mean, if a system requires total global compliance, but the rules only apply to the people standing outside the club, eventually the people outside are going to stop recognizing the authority of the bouncer.
An incredibly complex puzzle, and clearly one that the world is still struggling to solve. Thank you for joining us as we trace the anatomy of global distrust and the hidden mechanics behind everyday geopolitical frustration. Keep challenging the structures around you, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.